Thanks for joining today's SPK webinar entitled Optimizing Jira Workflows from Chaos to Clarity in Project Management. My name is Michael Roberts, Vice President of Sales and Marketing here at SPK and Associates. We have a great webinar today. As a reminder, all of the attendees today will be muted when you join. If you have any questions during the event, please feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom or in the chat. We're always open to people adding information in the chat during the presentation. We do have folks moderating and helping in those areas to share information or help get questions answered. So please do feel free to do that during the webinar, but we will have a Q&A section at the end of today's webinar where you can ask questions and we will do our best to answer those. So nobody updates Jira. I think we've all been here at some point. You're chasing people down, reminding them to update their tickets, only to get sometimes absolutely nothing back. Or the classic, sure, I'll update it, and all they do is make the smallest, most meaningless change. The reality is, if people aren't keeping Jira up to date, the whole system breaks down. Reports aren't accurate, status meetings are useless, becomes more of a chore than a tool. And I always say that these memes are funny because they're true. It's the real world things that people are having to deal with. And then there's a workflow problem. Somebody gets really excited and builds a brand new, super complex one-off workflow, and it's never ever used, or in worst case scenarios, it's too complicated and nobody understands how to move things through the course of the project. Overcomplicating workflows or creating too many unique ones makes Jira harder to use and harder to manage. Pretty soon, instead of simplifying your process, Jira just ends up adding a ton of friction. And I always, we'll talk about this here in a second. I always hear, oh, I hate Jira. And it's because of things like this that makes it hard. At the end of the day, Jira is incredibly powerful. But if you set it up incorrectly or you don't set it up intuitively, even the smartest person in your organization will try to avoid it. And I love this tweet because when a user ultimately checks out and they just stop using Jira, Jira stops being the single source of truth that it's ultimately meant to be, and the benefit to organizations. So again, my name is Michael Roberts. I'm Vice President of Sales and Marketing here at SPK. We're a Gold Atlassian Solution Partner, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Carlos Almeida. Carlos, feel free to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. My name is Carlos Almeida. I'm the VP of Engineering at SPK and Associates. I've spent the last 15 years working in software engineering and DevOps with a strong focus on highly regulated industries like medical devices, aerospace, and automotive. Over that time, I've had the opportunity to help organizations modernize their development practices while still meeting very strict compliance and quality constraints. At SPK, we partner with leading technology providers such as PTC, GitLab, and Atlassian. And we've worked with many customers to implement and refine their Atlassian infrastructure. I'm really excited to share with you guys some of my experiences, especially in the workflow space, and we can dive into that today. So looking forward to it.
Well, I'm so glad you're here, Carlos, because we got, I think, some good examples of real world chaos that we've seen in Jira that you and your team have seen even more closely. So we'll talk about that and kind of the ugly side a little bit, and in more hopes to share how ugly it can be if not, supported with governance and understanding. And then we'll talk about how to choose the right project type in Jira that ultimately aligns with the right outcomes that you want. We'll talk about how to effectively design workflows that really get the best out of Jira. It is extremely powerful when you design it correctly. And then more importantly, we'll talk a little bit about the automation component. And Carlos and I did another whole webinar. You can go check that out on demand. But that webinar is really in depth in terms of the automation component. But we included some of that here because that is definitely related to the workflow component and efficiency and ultimately governance. And as I mentioned, we will do a question and answer session at the end. So, Carlos, while I did share hopefully some funny memes about what we see in real life in Atlassian environments, I think it would be good for the attendees to know if we shared some of the exact situations. We'll leave the names out to protect the innocent. but especially around Atlassian Cloud and Jira specifically. So can you share a little bit more about what you've seen and kind of what that looks like?
Absolutely. Well, let's just start off with this slide here. This slide highlights one of the most common issues we see with Jira implementations. A lot of teams just stick with the default workflows, and often those defaults are really oversimplified: to do, in progress, and done. Now, that might be fine if you're running a very lightweight project, but let's be honest, that's not how most organizations really work. Real world processes involve handoffs, reviews, QA approvals, compliance checks, you name it. So, as an example, we have worked with a medical device company that was using this exact workflow. On paper, everything looked smooth. Issues were moving to in progress and done, etc. But in reality, code reviews, QA testing, FDA required sign-offs were all happening in email threads and in spreadsheets outside of Jira. So the Jira board, looked like they had a clean picture, but their leadership had no visibility into really where the real bottlenecks were. They didn't know how long their approvals were taking. They couldn't measure their QA workload. They couldn't do any automation or build standardized reports. So oversimplified workflows isn't just about missing details, it's about missing the truth about how your company is working. If your workflow doesn't reflect your actual process, Jira becomes more of a checklist tool rather than a system of record. And this is a huge missed opportunity for visibility, automation, and continuous improvement. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is the opposite. The opposite, right? This slide, sometimes companies try to capture every possible step, approval or exception, and teams end up building workflows that look like this: dozens of statuses, multiple transition paths, dependencies everywhere. On paper, it looks like you're building this process that's comprehensive and airtight, but in reality, overly complex workflows slow teams down. They create confusion. People aren't really sure which status to pick or what the next step actually is. They add administration overhead. Developers and testers often spend time, more time clicking buttons in Jira than doing the real work. And ironically, these workflows often break the very things they're supposed to be helping with, like reporting, automation, and integration. An example, we work with a financial services company that had built a workflow with 18 different statuses just for their bug tracking process. So developers were asking us or asking them, do I move this to ready to internal QA or pending business review first? The back and forth slowed them down so much that sometimes issues sat in Jira untouched for a long time, while the real work again was happening outside the system because developers will get around a system that's not well designed. They have to get their work done. And then the reporting became useless because nobody was using the system. The data wasn't trusted. And again, the leadership team didn't get a clear view of where things were going. So my takeaway here is workflows should mirror how your teams work and not every hypothetical scenario. All right, here's a fun example submitted from someone at one of the Atlassian community websites. This workflow is an eye chart, right? The sheer complexity. Just look at it. Multiple branches, circular transitions, and so many statuses that it's almost impossible to follow. Now, the reason I show you this isn't to poke fun, but to make a point. Workflows like this don't add clarity, they add friction. Instead of guiding teams through their process, they create roadblocks and confusion. And when the workload gets this complicated, people just stop using it. They work around the system. So again, the takeaway here is complexity doesn't equal control. The best workflows are ones that strike a balance between the steps that matter without drowning your teams in unnecessary detail. Next slide. Another common issue we see, almost regardless of whether workflows are simple or complex, is when teams accidentally inject confusion. So here's a perfect example. In this screenshot, you can see status is set to close, but the resolution field says unresolved. That's a problem because these two fields are supposed to work together. Uh, Status tells us where the issue is in the workflow, like to do, in progress, or closed. Resolution tells us how or why the issue was finished. Like it's fixed, or I won't fix it, or it's a duplicate, or done. Those are two different things which are important. So sometimes we see customers set their workflow up and they miss setting up the resolution field properly. And that ends up coming up with this mismatch. The issue looks closed, but the reports still think it's unresolved. That means your burn down charts, your velocity reports, and your SLA tracking, they all become unreliable. Now, we've seen a lot of customers hit this. For example, I had a customer in aerospace industry that had thousands of issues marked as closed, but with no resolution. And their release reports kept showing hundreds of open bugs, even though they were actually already addressed. So leadership thought QA was behind schedule, but in reality, it was just a workflow misconfiguration. So this is important to get it right. Next slide. So I'm going to start off with giving you my top recommendations for workflows, and we're going to get into it in detail as we go through here. So starting off, use the right project template. If you're setting up something like an HR onboarding or contract approvals, don't try to cram those into a Jira software workflow. Uh, that sounds silly, but we had worked with a customer who had exactly that scenario. They had built this workflow, but they had used the wrong template. And such, the workflow and fields and everything else associated had unnecessary extra stuff like code review, QA tests. This is, again, for HR onboarding. I have a customer right now that we are redoing their engineering help desk because they had built it. This is a large customer, in fact, and they had built their help desk starting with a Jira software project. And they had created, and I'm not kidding, 90 some issue or work item types. So SPKs come in and figure out how to clean all that up and morph it into the right project with the right workflow, which would have been and is a Jira service management project. So again, start with the right project, otherwise you have a nightmare later. Don't confuse complexity with a number of statuses. A workflow with 10 clear status can be a lot easier to use than one which is overloaded with ton of stuff. And make sure this is like a secret thing. Don't hide validators and post functions or don't overload it, right? Sometimes you don't know all these things are happening underneath the table when you move a transition and it becomes complex. So make sure that those things are visible. Um, think about complexity at two levels, right? First, the tool level, anything could trigger any transition could trigger an approval or an automation or sort of other things that you build. But also, you have to stop and ask, what is important of these five statuses? Why do I need to pick this one or that one? If you have to really think about it, then it's not mirroring your business, and that makes it complexity. Um, make workflows transparent. So if the team members always know their next step, it becomes easier. So again, this is really in how you name stuff. So if we had a customer who had ready for QA or ready for verification. So which one makes sense, right? So you have to really define what that is for your company and try to clean that up so there's no ambiguity and things don't get stuck in limbo. And then always set the resolution properly. I already mentioned that one. Next slide. Balance complexity with usability. So in regulated industries, medical device, aerospace, and finance, approvals and sign-offs are non-negotiable, but don't overdo it. We work with a customer, a pharma customer, who had an approval on every single step of the status change. And this added days to their cycle time. So we simplified it to approvals that only happen at critical points. that kept them in compliance. So you got to strike that balance. Um, Also, make sure that you're using intuitive naming. We talked about statuses that make sense. Pending review, maybe you want to try ready for QA or awaiting business approval. You got to make sure that those things make sense in the status naming. And then standardize. Don't reinvent a new workflow or wheel for every project. Use workflow schemas to standardize. So we had a customer with hundreds of projects, and they probably had, 50 or 60 different variations of workflows, each with its own flows and fields, states, etc. It was chaos, because just the administration of that is nuts, and you can't build on top of it. So what we did, SPK did, is try to consolidate into maybe 3 or 4 workflows that make sense as a template and used workflow schemes. So with that, then we're able to save hours for administration, and reporting also became consistent because with all this different stuff, it was really hard to build good reports. So standardize and reuse. And then lastly, test and iterate. Um, don't assume that the workflow you design is perfect. It won't be. Pilot it with real users and get their feedback and refine it over time as your team evolves. When your team evolves, your workflow evolves. So the big picture here, workflow should reflect how your teams actually work. Not more, not less. Start simple, only what you need, and keep refining as you go. Next slide.
I love that, Carlos. Like you hit on, I feel like all of the complexities that that could be with regards to Jira projects that create all that chaos. Because manageability, usability, all those things are really, really important. So thank you for going through that. I love your top nine. So we definitely don't want those type of outcomes and the things that those things cause. And Carlos gave you his nine. But I have to admit, we've discussed this same kind of thing internally, and uh, how do we address these, and how do we provide customers with the right outcomes and give them both guidance and support and paint the path that they're going down and do it the right way. I think a lot of it starts with the creation of the project and choosing the right type of project. So, Carlos, can you share a little bit around project type specifically in cloud?
All right. Well, let's. This is very good. Thank you, Mike. It gives me an opportunity to um, kind of advance this and talk about some of the basics. Advance the slide so we can see both, I think, at the same
Sure.
time.
Yep.
Thank you. So one of the first decisions you have to make is, do I use team managed project or company managed project? When should you choose one over the other? So team managed projects are great for smaller, independent teams that want autonomy. They can create and adjust their own workflow or issue types, work items, fields without needing an admin, which is nice for a startup product team. That may be just the right thing. Benefit here is speed and flexibility. The pitfall is that every team can end up, and they will, like I say, can end up, they will end up doing things in their own unique way. If you have 5 teams, they're going to have 5 different team managed workflows, different fields, and probably no way to standardize reports across them. This doesn't scale well and becomes an administration nightmare to really go beyond that. Company managed projects, on the other hand, built for scalability and governance. They share workflows and fields and schemes that can be applied across multiple teams. You can build a template for one and then basically use that as a cookie cutter to create your new projects. So if you need consistency, compliance, and centralized reporting, this is what you need to do, right? Use company manage. In regulated industries like medical device, we always recommend that you must use those because we also care about sign-offs and compliance, and those things need to be consistent across all your design rule flow, the whole manufacturing process, the whole digital thread for compliance has to be there. So we insist on it. So that's good. The pitfall, of course, is now you do require somebody to be in charge, a Jira admin to do things. So maybe R&D teams feel like now they have to wait for someone to do stuff. Maybe slow down, but that's the trade-off to be able to scale. So rule of thumb, if you're starting small, you want to be self-sufficient, you may want to try team manage, but company manage is the way to go. And then one thing I will mention here, I'm going to double down on my last comment, thinking about it. Often when we are engaged with a customer, especially when they're like, okay, we've acquired more company, another company, or we're growing, and now we have 400 projects that we need to deal with. Um, One of the first things we end up doing is trying to herd the cats of all the team managed projects that are out there, and trying to get them into a company managed project into a standardized way. That's a lot of work. It's a lot of work because it becomes unmanageable. So if you think that you're letting team managed projects grow, like weeds in your garden, if at some point you may want to take that and have to control it, I would nip it in the bud and start with company management up front. Don't 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 let it get out of control and then have a huge project to try to create the new thing over here and do bulk move of tickets over and all that kind of stuff. Try to save that headache and be smart and start with company managed. Next slide.
And it's to your point, Carlos, it becomes unmanageable. And then just moving everything from team to company is a whole nother thing that doesn't really provide, immediate value, right? So it's a lot of work for not a lot of value.
Absolutely. And this, I'll only highlight because I've already talked to most of this. Permission schemas and permission granularity, you really don't have that level of control with team managed. So if you are in a regulated industry for sure, but in general, for good control of access and roles, visibility, all those things, um, the company managed projects allow you to have that control. You don't have that control with the team managed as much. So that's all I'll add for this particular slide. Governance, yep. Again, I'm beating on that drum pretty loudly here. Um, with team managed projects, one of the basic things I see always messed up is inconsistent status names like done and completed, closed. So that makes the cross project reporting almost impossible. So how do you do the governance on that when you have to create reports and controls or build automation rules from it to lock it down? Again, I'm triple down. Company managed projects allow you to have that control and ability to scale and control the reports, who accesses things. Um, you know, the there is a trade-off between agility and control, I already mentioned, but company managed is the way to go. Next slide.
There's your secret. You've let it
That's
out.
that's just me.
Uh, All right, so there's even more, I think, important things to remember. So we've talked about project types. We've talked about your nine components. I think, Carlos, I want to get into, where do you start on good workflow design and kind of what that may look like. And I've hopefully captured some of the things that you've done and the way that you approach things, but feel free to elaborate on any of these.
Sure, yeah. So when we talk about good workflow design, I think there are really three guiding principles. One is to keep it simple. A workflow shouldn't try to capture every exception. It should guide them through the main steps, like backlog, progress, testing, and done, without overwhelming them. Align workflows to real business processes. The design should mirror how your teams actually work. If you always do code reviews or client sign-offs, build those in. But if you don't. Don't put them in there. Don't add a step just because you can, right? And then the third one is automate where it adds value. Jira can become really powerful when you let automation take care of some of the repetitive work, like auto assigning reviewers or setting the resolution when something is close. But keep it focused If you keep it focused, automation should save you time and not add noise. So again, it's about striking good design, about uh, complexity and efficiency for your company. Next slide. All right, this is back to the crazy scrambled. Can you tell where we are? It's like Find Waldo. So when we design workflows, it helps me to think in terms of status, transition, and outcome. Those are like my brain works that way. First, we start by identifying the key statuses. Don't document every little step. Focus on the meaningful points like in progress, test, done. That way, people always know immediately where things stand at a glance. Next, define the transitions. Teams need to understand how work flows from one to another. For example, when we need to have something happen before in progress or testing, is it a code review? Is it a QA handoff or both? Clarity here prevents things from getting stuck. And then finally focus on what matters. It's like this picture shows, it's easy to get lost in mapping every handoff across every role. But in reality, every box does not need to be a workflow step. What really matters is tracking the work that drives outcomes, completed features, approved changes, or validated fixes. So keep it simple, keep it meaningful, and make sure the outcomes are clear. Next slide. Um, Pitfalls, I've already mentioned a few of them. Inconsistent naming. The next one, sometimes I see because you can design your workflow to kind of go everywhere. Atlassian has a nice graphical way of doing it, but sometimes you end up with unused transitions or dead ends, or something that's a status is rarely used, if ever, or things that get stuck in there. So I call that your workflow clutter. So it's good every now and then to go in there and declutter your workflow and clean it up. So again, every workflow has a clean, easy, identifiable status, clean, identifiable transition, and if you have to explain it, more than an elevator pitch, it probably is too complicated.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, best practices: naming conventions, logical transitions. I hear a pattern in what I'm saying. Proper use of resolutions, and then finally, automate repetitive steps. Again, this is where Jira really shines. If I transition to done, you can automatically set the resolution, notify stakeholders. If I move something into code review, it can assign it to the right reviewer. Automation reduces human error. It really speeds things up. Next slide.
Which the automation component is really important. I love how you talked about that. Now, Carlos and I did a whole other webinar on this. We'll talk about that in a second, but I want if you could share a little bit with the audience, Carlos, about the power of automations in conjunction with that workflow chaos to clarity. How does that help?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite areas, favorite topics, and so I need to. I could spend an hour or more here, and we already have, because Michael's going to point you to a webinar. But this is one of my favorite spaces. Why use automation? Because it takes all the repetitive work out of things that nobody wants to do. And now Atlassian has really gone with both feet into the AI space. So there's now additional help in the AI plus automation. Can imagine how much manual effort you're going to reduce. I'm a big proponent of using it. It'll free up your team to focus on higher value work. So a quick thumbnail about how these automations work. It all starts with triggers. For example, status changes. When something moves from in progress to done, you could trigger a rule that will set the resolution, notify stakeholders, or even create follow-up tasks. Field updates. Maybe you want a priority change to high, Jira can automatically escalate it to a manager. Or maybe a time-based trigger. I often use this on the help desk side for SLAs and aging tickets, like sending a reminder of an issue that has been stuck in progress for more than 5 days. So it bubbles up. My team does our stand-ups every morning for all these different projects, and I actually do a dashboard from an automation that will tell me when things are coming up that are about to breach. So I can focus on these things first and make sure we don't breach our SLAs and that we're right on top of things. So automation is one way that we can make this happen.
And I threw this in the middle, Carlos, in the event that people are looking for more details on these automation components. Here's the QR code. You can snap that and go right to the on-demand webinar that Carlos and I did about automations and helping workflows. This goes into a little bit more detail than what we're going to do today. But high level, that's the webinar that we've been referring to.
Yeah, and I'll also add, and I didn't mention it, there's tons of cool automations that Atlassian keeps building sort of a template library. So you're not starting from zero uh, as low code or no code kind of thing. So I definitely want you to check it out and check out the webinar that we did earlier. Okay, let's look at some of these rules just for fun. So this rule kicks in the moment a new issue is created. Instead of sitting in unassigned or backlog, Jira will immediately take action and assign it to someone. So in this case, a rule is set up to assign the issue to a random member of an administration group, but you can configure that in a lot of different ways. It could be a team lead, reporter's manager, or someone specific in QA or support. So a lot of flexibility here that you didn't have to build this in the workflow. The automation rule took care of it for you. Next slide. So here's another cool example. This was again about notifications. In this case, a rule is triggered whenever a work item changes state. So if the automation checks the issue, make sure it has an assignee, and it does, Jira automatically will send them an email letting them know the status is updated. So this is great. And now doesn't have to be just Jira. It can be in your Slack channel. It can be in other connected areas, and AI will also can act on it. So there's a lot of really good ways to kind of bring this to you or to your engineering team. Next slide. So this one is automatically updating fields. So when a work item is updated, specifically, when a parent link is added to a child issue, what the rule does is make sure the related fields are updated in the parent at the same time, if that makes sense. It ties it all up together, a nice way, bundling your related items together. Next slide. All right, to tie things up, again, I mentioned my 9, rules of workflow etiquette, if you will. Martha Stewart. Let's start with the right foundation with the right project, not reinventing the wheel. Keep workflow simple but meaningful. Don't confuse the number of statuses with actual value. Remember, complexity should sit in the back end and not drive the user experience. Make sure workflows are transparent so everyone knows their next step. Always set the resolutions properly to keep reports clean and balance compliance with usability. Only add approvals where they really matter. Use clear, intuitive naming so nobody has to guess what a status means. Um, and if nothing else, remember this, workflows should work for your team, not against them. So start simple and add complexity only when it truly matters. And make sure your team is constantly giving you feedback and testing and evolving this. This is continuous improvement. It's not a one and done situation. Back to you, Mike.
I love it. I love it, Carlos. There's a lot of man hours in the capturing of all these recommendations and things. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Before we get to our question and answer section, I do want to give a couple brief things, some things that may be of value to the audience. We do free Jira workflow audits, and that is something that kind of goes with the experience that we have and we can kind of tell you, give you some best practices and recommendations. If you're interested in that, you can reach out to our team via info@spkaa.com. In terms of if you're not familiar with SPK, we're an Atlassian Gold Solution Partner. We've been in business over 20 years. We're a certified woman-owned business, mostly focused on the West Coast, but I and a couple other members of our team are elsewhere in the United States. I'm in North Carolina, but we have folks everywhere in US and Canada, so we work with a lot of different companies, even globally, in what we do. And we partner with a lot of different companies to provide, not just the best in practice or best practices, but also the best in class tools to support what they're looking to do, including Atlassian. That's why we really focused on a robust network of partners that are committed to, being a top tier technology or a top tier service solution. And we've invested a lot of our team's expertise and time in becoming certified in these areas. So we know what these partners are ultimately looking for and the best practices in terms of implementation and ongoing maintenance. A quick note about kind of the outcomes that we always focus on. Over the years, we've looked at, the value that we provide our customers. Most of our customers are working with us for a very long time. On average, they're working with us for over 8 years. That's because we're consistently providing these basic four outcomes. We call them the SPK ACEs, accelerating their time to market, getting that product to market as quickly as possible, and cutting down, as Carlos mentioned, on that cycle time and understanding what that cycle time is, being able to help reduce that. Reducing costs, whether that's licensing costs or implementation costs or rework or any of those things, we try to really help with cost efficiency. Ensuring compliance. Carlos talked a lot about regulated industries, medical device, aerospace, automotive, and how they can ensure compliance by using these tools and systems and best practices. And then ultimately hoping that we are helping build an exceptionally quality product or helping our customers build that product and get to a good outcome. So that's ultimately the goal of what we do and the outcomes that we provide. So I'll pause here, and if you have any questions, you can feel free to put them in the question and answer section of Zoom. Carlos and I also have our LinkedIn and our email listed on this slide as well. So if you have any questions after this event, you can always reach out to one of us and ask any of the questions that you may have. So we had a couple in here, Carlos. Let me do this one first. What's your recommendation for managing workflow versions across multiple projects?
Oh yeah, so I touched on that a little bit. Again, you're going to use a workflow scheme, right? Instead of cloning the workflow project by project, you can create or link these projects into the same workflow using a workflow scheme. That way, when you need to make a change, say you add a new status, you only do it once, and it applies everywhere. So you have to think about it because you're now making one change that's going to ripple to all of the projects that are in that workflow scheme. I use this all the time because definitely I like to not deal with a lot of administration overhead. So think about it and organize your workflow schemes to make sense. And that will save you a lot of time. And then you can manage workflows across many projects at
Yeah,
once.
I I I I couldn't agree more. The That's really powerful, especially for uh, what we end up seeing is Jira administrators are not just Jira administrators; they're also the director of engineering or the whatever, and so this cuts down on the additional work that they have to do. So yeah, definitely agree with you there. Um, in regulated industries like medical device, how do we design Jira workflows to meet compliance requirements like FDA 21 CFR Part 11 or the equivalent ISO standards?
Oh, okay, that's a great question. Thanks. So that's often the first thing that we're brought in as a company that we do a lot of work with medical devices. We understand that world, and we also understand Atlassian's infrastructure. So we're the perfect partner to help you move that along if you're in medical device or other regulated industries. So the thing is to identify the compliance checkpoints that need to be enforced and bake them in. For a very common one is electronic signatures or dual approvals. So we have to carefully make sure those are in place. And that also feeds our auditability and records that need to be presented in case there is an audit. So all those things need to be provided. And sometimes what we do, depending on what you're doing, we actually can add some marketplace apps that focus more on like Part 11. Part 11 is a whole list of things that you want to do when you want to work with a medical device company, you sell into one, or other industries that have that checklist of controls. You're backing up of systems, training, intended use, all these things that flow into that security access control. There's a whole bevy of things that we get into. But what we try to do is we leverage what you already have bought. You bought Jira, you bought your Atlassian platform, so we do as much as we can there, and then we overlay that with some marketplace apps that may be very specific to what you need,
Right.
like the marketplace Part 11 app.
Yeah. I like this question next, Carlos, because it's about Rovo. We didn't really touch a ton on the AI component, but I like this question. Um, I have trained a Rovo agent to pull previous assignee and request type data from a specific project. The goal is to assign tickets based upon this type of data. If the ticket does not automate to someone, do you have any pointers on how to do this?
Yeah, no, we're getting a lot of Rovo activity right now, especially in connectors, right? Getting out there, folks that have stuff sitting out on SharePoint as well. Um, Rovo is going to work with your existing workflows, right? It's not going to do anything other than if you are a human going and exercising the thing. So my pointers is to put yourself in that AI's agent shoes, and what and also what you allow it to do, right? So there's permissions. If only certain people are allowed to advance a state, or mandatory fields need to happen when something is advanced, you have to train your robo agent, if they're managing that kind of stuff, to also give it the permission it is allowed to, and have it fill in the things that move it from screen to screen in the workflow. So this is like Brave New World territory for us as well, as we're trying to build out this, and Robo is relatively new. Um, I think that's going to be our, as an industry, our challenge of how much you give to the AI to do stuff versus how much you leave it in human control for specific things. I believe um, if you maintain the auditability, traceability, and really control what the robo is getting the data from, you can really fine tune it. And then also, obviously, with the automation rules, you can also say, fire off this automation rule uh, that does certain tasks. So you don't have to train Robo to do all the subtasks. You just say, fire this automation rule, which takes care of it for you. So there's things you can kind of stitch together to help you build that Robo
Right.
intelligent client.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot with Rovo, whole lot. Another one here, Carlos. Can we restrict certain workflow transitions to specific roles and users? I believe you said that in the presentation part, but if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. Inside, you can definitely restrict them as part of the workflow. You can, only a QA person can move an issue into testing, or release manager can transition into release. Multiple ways of doing it, right, in the workflow itself. There's also uh, validators that you can add in there that have conditions on things for who is allowed to do it. So there's multiple ways of doing it.
Another one. How do subtask workflows interact with the parent workflow?
So subtasks can have their own workflow that are separate from the parent issue. So a parent may move to done only when all the subtasks are completed. That's a very common one. Um, Jira doesn't enforce that automatically. You actually need to set up a condition or automation rule to make sure the parent works in that manner. Um, my advice is keep the subtask workflow really, really simple so that they support and don't conflict with the parent workflow. That's another pitfall. I forgot to mention that. If you go crazy with the subtasks, sometimes you get kind of get lost in in trying to manage the workflow of the subtask before you get it to the parent task. Keep it simple.
Yeah. And then the last one in the list that I have at the moment, feel free if you guys are still interested in putting more in, feel free. Um, is there a performance impact when workflows get very large?
Yeah, there can be. So let's just talk about uh, what we create ourselves as a performance impact. So while Jira can technically handle workloads of dozens, status, and transitions, your performance can degrade when you pile on a lot of post functions, conditions, and validators. I've seen that happen. So when you overload it, I've seen, you're moving something and all of a sudden, why is it taking so long to get to that particular next state? So that's because it's doing a lot of work underneath it. So the more logic you has to evaluate on each transition, the slower the system's going to feel for your users. So what I like to do is try to offload some of those things to maybe automation rules that happen separately from the flow transition. So it feels like your workflow is still moving quickly, but there's stuff happening in the background. Like, oh, okay, it's creating new subtasks, it's doing a bunch of stuff, and it just kind of catches up. So the user feels like they're still moving forward, right? So that's what I like to do is kind of distribute that workload.
Nice. And I believe, and there are published automation numbers related to cloud performance based upon your plan and number of users. So
Yeah.
that's on the Atlassian website. So that's a whole nother angle
That's
of
another thing. You don't want to get
performance.
throttled. Yeah,
Yeah.
you gotta you can go to and you could again, we're getting down to automation rule space is my favorite place. I've seen companies go nuts with automation and now you're firing stuff constantly and everything is slower. You can go crazy on automation and burn your budget and also slow things down. So everything is a balance.
Yep.
You want to tune it.
Cool. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A, so I believe we'll call it a webinar today. So, Carlos, thank you for all your insight and your time today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you,
Um,
Michael.
for the folks in the audience, or if you've registered and weren't able to attend, you'll get this recording definitely within 10 business days. That's what we guarantee. Probably before that, but that's when you'll have it in your inbox, and you can share it with others to hopefully learn a little bit more about the workflow chaos and how to best solve that. So, Carlos, again, thank you guys for joining. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, everyone.